Well, joining us now from our Nairobi studios to get an update on the Kenyan market, Kimathi Ikiao, Independent Analyst. Kimathi, thanks as always for joining us. So let's get your view on the developments in the technology space in Kenya, because we were just looking at that story there, and Kenya very much trying to position itself as Africa's Silicon Valley. What's your assessment of the progress here, and how would one get exposure to this? Are there obviously the likes of Safaricom with the mobile technology is one that stands out, but how would an investor get exposure to the technology space?
Very good afternoon to you. It's always a pleasure to be on the show. The technology market and the tech space actually for Kenya has really grown tremendously, and we have a lot of interest globally coming into Kenya, a lot of PE funds, a lot of private equity money coming in and trying to chase the deals, largely on the back of the huge Safaricom and Equity Bank's innovation. So we have the global players actually keeping a keen eye on Kenya. Last week we had Google's chairman, Eric Schmidt, come over, and he had quite some praise for the Kenyan technology space. Now, looking forward, the opportunities really available for the global investor or the outside investor tend to be towards the line of private equity. Mm-hmm. And if you look at to the local stock market, you're quite right. Only Safaricom and Access Kenya seem to provide an entry point or a leeway directly into the tech space. So looking at those very high PE levels of, say, Safaricom and Access Kenya at 17 and about 9 respectively. Those are pretty high. So the global investor really needs to come in and look at it from quite an objective point of view, and possibly go in through the way of private equity. Mm-hmm.
So it certainly is, as you say, perhaps the entry level and the cost is not really one that would be kind of open to smaller investors right now, but there's an opportunity further down the line if you see listings coming from these deals. But let's talk about Centum, because buying a 45% stake in the regional micro lender. Talk to us about that deal and what it means for the company going forward.
Yes, that was quite an interesting deal that came out into the market, the close of business on Friday. So the market really was looking forward to seeing more information on that particular item. But from what we have is that Centum's acquisition and substantial buyout into the Platco company is that it really provides Centum an avenue into getting towards the mass market of financial products category. And we saw really the buoyancy of the Kenyan investor and the Kenyan entrepreneur at that, with the very high interest rates we saw last year and the very, very tough market conditions. So if we look at it on a wider spectrum, we see that there's quite some opportunity for the bottom of the pyramid, and really that's what Centum has done by this particular acquisition. Mm-hmm. They have gone in, they've identified a regional player who can provide them with that geographical asset spread. And from the bottom of the pyramid, really it's a good play for Centum. Many actually have been of the mindset that Centum has probably overextended in terms of its real estate play, but this particular acquisition proves that it's not. And there's a lot of opportunity for the company, especially with it having the lowest price to equity multiples of the listed investment firms. So Centum, it's a fantastic play for them and will really help diversify those revenues.
Certainly is interesting one into the financial space, and of course we've seen such a strong growth from Kenyan banks. But what's your assessment of the kind of risks of this growth in the banking sector, of course, relative to GDP growth, because banks have certainly outpaced the growth in the economy. Are you concerned about non-performing loans that could come on banks' balance sheets further down the line?
Yes, there has been that particular concern, especially for the NPLs, those non-performing loans. And looking at it on a forward perspective, there is at least the good news that a lot of these interest rates seem to be coming down, and with that, there will be a lot of reprieve, and those non-performing loans are most likely to decrease moving forward. But the truth of the matter is that only will we now start seeing the impact of those non-performing loans when you look backwards, say from the year that just ended is when we expect to see what the real impact of those very high interest rates has been. So there is quite some concern about the very high growth in the banking sector as opposed to the GDP. And that misnomer is actually very well explained by the way the banks actually book in their profits. And that really is what one ought to have in mind, given the banking sector and, of course, trying to compare those numbers with the country's GDP growth.
Yeah, let's just turn our attention to the airline space, because there's speculation that FastJet could be looking at a JV with JetLink, and of course that being the airline that once again took to the skies this year after the suspension last year. What do you make of the rumours there? Do you think that's likely to transpire? Because we know FastJet has ambitions in Africa, and this of course would be an entry point into one of the key markets for it.
Yes, indeed. Well, there's always the possibility of that coming in. And sometimes they say you buy on the rumor and sell on the fact as far as the equities are concerned. But for this particular market space, the competition really has been quite an issue, especially looking at it from the possibility of the low service carriers coming into the Kenyan market, operating from the Kenyan airspace. And actually, when you look at it in terms, especially of the Kenya Airways figures that were released today, we see a lot of those competitive factors coming in, and also a lot of the local and regional market growth also all factored into the same earnings. For instance, we saw that the local travels really increased by over 15% comparing with a similar period in 2011. So the market really is growing. The infrastructure is actually there, and it's would be quite interesting to see a merger of that kind of nature happen.
Thank you so much for that analysis today, Kimathi Ikiao, Independent Analyst. And just looking at those Kenya Airways numbers, which we didn't get through to in quarter three, uplifting just over 991,000 passengers. That 3.6% growth there year on year. And just looking at passenger uplift to Europe, falling back by 19% and cutting their capacity to Europe by 26%. So as you can see, the impact of the Eurozone really showing on numbers like this for Kenyan airline, a key Kenya Airways. And of course, also talking about the growth to Asia. So that also starting to come forward, the growth that we're seeing offsetting the downturn in Europe.